Hi guys, my name is Sophia and I'm going to take you guys through my final assessment assignment. So my assignment was based on the grade 3 mathematics standard focused on understanding equivalent fractions and comparing fractions. So my overall goal of the assessment was for students to demonstrate their understanding of fraction concepts through different forms of assessment, including selected response, written response, personal communication, and performance assessment. Throughout my assignment, you will see that everything is squished onto one page. However, if this was something that I would be handing out to students, I would definitely put the learning targets on the first page, the student assessment on the second, and then any scoring or rubrics on the third, while keeping the answer key for myself. However, for the interest of time and space, I just decided to squish everything onto one page. I also decided that each learning target would be focusing on their own assignment, so there's going to be 4 assignments I'm going to walk you through. So starting with assignment 1, this assessment focuses on my first learning target, which is I can identify and explain what the numerator and denominator represent in a fraction and express whole numbers as a fraction. So this is a knowledge-based learning target, so I chose a selected response because students are demonstrating their understanding of important fraction concepts and vocabulary. The Bloom's taxonomy for this target is understand, because students are not just recalling definitions, but they're demonstrating that they understand what the numerator and denominator represent and how fractions can represent whole numbers. So the assessment includes multiple choice, multiple select, and short selected response questions. And these questions assess whether students understand the role of the numerator, the role of the denominator, fractions that represent one whole, and how whole numbers can be represented as a fraction. So for example, students are asked what the numerator represents in 5/8. The correct answer is that it represents the number of parts being considered. So these ones are examples of multiple choice, where each correct answer would be 2 points each. This total assessment is worth 12 points, and students can receive points based on selecting the correct answer, and giving an answer key is provided to ensure that there is consistent grading. So here in part 1 is just the multiple choice. Part 2 is multiple select, so students would be able to select the 2 correct answers. 1 point for each correct answer chosen. And then in part 3, we have a short selected response where the students would have to decide which one is most correct. The scoring is as follows. In the first part for multiple choice, there was 2 points for each correct answer. And then in the multiple select, 1 point for each correct selection. And then for this part 3, it was 2 points for the correct answer. The answer key just takes you through exactly what I was talking about before, just which one is the correct multiple choice, which one are the correct multiple select, and then which one is the correct answer for part 3. Now, assignment 2, the learning target is I can determine whether 2 fractions are equivalent and explain why they have the same value using models or number lines. So this target focuses on reasoning. So I selected a written response assessment because students need to explain their thinking rather than just identifying an answer. This will allow me to assess whether the students understand why fractions are equivalent. The assessment also includes 3 questions. The first question asks students to determine whether 2/4 and 1/2 are equivalent, where students must provide a written explanation, a visual model, and a mathematical reasoning. The second question asks students to place equivalent fractions on a number line. So this allows students to demonstrate that equivalent fractions represent the same location and value. And then the third question addresses the misconception where a student believes that 3/5 and 6/10 are different because the numbers are different, where students must explain why this thinking is incorrect using mathematical evidence. I think that this assessment will challenge their own thinking and their own misconceptions while allowing them to provide evidence and show proof that equivalent fractions are going to be the same on either a number line or a mathematical model, so they can see it with their own eyes and create that own model to create evidence for themselves. The assessment is worth 20 points and is graded using an analytical rubric that evaluates mathematical accuracy, reasoning, mathematical vocabulary, and a visual representation. I think this just gains all aspects of how a student can understand, making sure that we capture their understanding and their true grades and understanding to give them an accurate mark. This as well has an answer key for each part. So for question 1, there is an answer for the written explanation, the visual model, and the mathematical explanation. Question 2, as each number line will look different depending on how they choose to display it, as long as each of these fractions are placed on the same point on the number line to show that they do understand equivalent fractions. And then for question 3, they should disagree because although numbers are different, the fractions do have the same value. So as long as they can explain that and show that using mathematical reasoning, then they will get the full marks for that. Then assignment 3, personal communication. The learning target is I can compare two fractions using the less than, the greater than, the equal to signs to justify my answers through reasoning about the size of each fraction. So the purpose of this assessment method is to allow the teacher to listen to students' mathematical thinking and ask follow-up questions to identify misconceptions that may not appear in written work. So this focuses on reasoning, so that's why I chose the personal communication assessment. Students will complete a teacher interview where they compare different fractions and explain their reasoning. So for example, the teacher may ask the students to compare 5/8 and 3/8, where they would say that 5/8 is equal to, greater than, less than 3/8. And since in this example both fractions have the same denominator, students should recognize that the fraction with the larger numerator represents a greater amount. Students will also compare fractions like 4/6 and 2/3 and explain why they are equivalent, even though the numerator and denominator are different. So using those mathematical reasoning skills, mathematical vocabulary would allow students to get those full marks while also answering the correct answer. And then finally, students will explain why fractions need to be refer to the same whole before comparing them. So this assesses whether students understand the concept behind the fraction comparison rather than just following that procedure. So this entire section is worth 16 points and is scored using an observation rubric based on correct comparisons, reasoning, communication, and response to follow-up questions. So this would also be more of a discussion where the students or where the teachers could ask follow-up questions to anything the students are saying. I think this also allows teachers to gain a fuller understanding of where the student is coming from, and then kind of get to the root of why they are getting something incorrect, or making sure they do truly understand the concepts. And then again, that does allow you to move forward with teaching with either the class as a whole or that specific student. Again, here's the answer key where it has all the correct answers. Of course, there isn't a longer paragraph or speech that we want each student to individually understand. They will all have a different understanding or a different answer to the question, as long as the core answer is correct. That's what you're looking for, and making sure that each student does have the correct understanding while also getting the correct answer. So as long as, the base of the answer is correct, it won't be this exact speech or this exact sentence, which is completely okay. Again, with part 3, they're not going to have the exact explanation, the exact example, as long as they give something that will provide an example to, their answer. That'll be good enough. And then we have our final assignment, which is the learning target is I can create a visual model, so a fraction strip, a number line, a pizza, to represent equivalent fractions and fraction comparisons. So this is a product-based learning target, so I selected performance assessment, where students need to demonstrate their understanding by creating a classroom poster that teachers can teach others about equivalent fractions. So in this one, the student task is to just create a poster where they're going to be given a whole bunch of different criteria. So they need to include fraction models, equivalent fraction groups, a fraction comparison, and a written explanation. For example, the student can identify that 1/2, 2/4, and 4/8 are equivalent because they represent the same amount of a whole. So this assessment will allow students to apply their knowledge and create a product that demonstrates conceptual understanding rather than only just answering questions. This is a way that they can apply their knowledge and show that they are able to look at what they've learned and then apply it to greater concepts, showing that they will be able to bring that knowledge into different classrooms or different grade levels. So this performance will be worth 20 marks total. For each criteria, there's 4 criteria. It'll be 5 marks each. I think also just depending on how well each criteria is met will determine how many of those 5 points they do end up getting. Of course, that will be up to each student or the teacher's discretion. And then because, of course, this is a performance assessment, there's no single correct product. Instead, the answer key will identify just required mathematical components while kind of allowing for the actual performance to be left up to the student's desire and decide how they see the mathematical concepts or how they choose to display them and teach them to other students. So you can see here, this is an example. However, no student will have this exact product or definition. Overall, I think I designed these assessments so that each student or each learning target is met using an assessment method that best fits that type of learning being assessed. This definitely could be put into one summative formal assessment at the end. However, I just chose to break it up so that each one can be specifically looked at using a specific assessment that can allow and test for specific learning. So the selected response assessment measures the foundational learning, the written response and personal communication measure students' reasoning, and the performance assessment allows students to create and demonstrate their understanding through a product. So using these multiple assessment methods provides a more complete picture of the student learning because students have those different opportunities to demonstrate their understanding. I also think that it gives the teacher a greater look into where exactly the class or specific students are lacking or are missing that knowledge, and then allows you to focus on those specific areas, and then of course build up from there. So thank you for listening, and if you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Thank you.